Hello there, I'm Aishwarya with you. Welcome to the first edition of World Panorama in the new year 2020. This program keeps you up to date with all the top latest international news stories that you need to know. So let us get going with the headlines. Major escalation in tensions between Washington and Tehran. Iran's most powerful military commander, General Qassam Soleimani, killed by US airstrike in Iraq. Trump says, done to stop a war, not to start one. Iran vows forceful revenge. Potential setback to disarmament. Kim Jong-un threatens a return to provocative tests, hints at introducing new strategic weapon after US misses end-of-year deadline to offer sanctions relief. Hong Kong kicks off 2020 with fresh protests. More than 1 million people joined the march. Violence reported in many areas. After being vandalized, HSBC forced to close branches in the city. Australia deploys military aid to towns ravaged by apocalyptic wildfires. At least 21 people dead. Authorities in southeast brace for a weekend of high temperatures and strong winds, threatening to worsen conditions. And Jakarta's worst flooding in 7 years leaves 43 dead, more than 192,000 displaced. Authorities resort to cloud seeding as weather agency predicts more rains. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have escalated. Iran's most powerful military commander, General Qassam Soleimani, has been killed by a US airstrike in Iraq. He was killed at Baghdad airport alongside local Iran-backed militias early on Friday in strikes ordered by US President Donald Trump. While Iran's supreme leader says that a forceful revenge awaits the criminals who have his blood, President Donald Trump says it was done to stop a war, not to start one. The strike comes days after pro-Iranian militia protesters attacked the US embassy in Baghdad. The death of Soleimani marks a potential turning point in the Middle East and represents a drastic change for American policy towards Iran. The first week of the new year saw tensions between US and Iran rising significantly. It began on New Year's Eve on Tuesday with the US embassy in Iraq attacked by protesters. The angry crowd set a part of building on fire, breached the reception area in the compound, forcing US troops to fire tear gas on the protesters. The demonstrators were furious over the deaths of members of an Iranian-backed militia, the Kataib Hezbollah, who were killed by US airstrikes in western Iraq and eastern Syria.
This protest is something little that we have offered to the martyrs. So many of us were killed. This is not the first time the US have hit us with. We were bombed before twice and thrice.
US President Donald Trump said Iran will be held accountable if lives were lost, saying this is not a warning, it is a threat. Further, he ordered about 750 American soldiers to be immediately deployed to the region, bolstering the 5,000 troops who are already stationed in Iraq.
Well, I think it's been handled very well. The Marines came in, we had some great warriors come in and do a fantastic job, and they were there instantaneously as soon as we heard.
Iran, meanwhile, denied Trump's accusation that it had orchestrated the incident. After a second day of protests on Wednesday, pro-Iranian demonstrators dispersed on Wednesday, ending the siege that had trapped American diplomats in the embassy compound.
I have thousands of people who are ready to join the protest. But we have responded to the call of the Iranian Prime Minister to disperse quietly.
It seemed then that the tensions would ease off. But on Friday, Iranian TVs announced the death of General Qassam Soleimani, the head of Iran's elite Quds force. Pentagon confirmed that the US military had indeed killed him at the direction of President Donald Trump by an airstrike at Baghdad's International Airport on Friday. The strike also killed Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, deputy commander of the Iran-backed militias in Iraq known as the Popular Mobilization Forces or PMF. Trump sent out a tweet of an American flag. US clarified that Soleimani was planning to attack American diplomats and he had approved the attacks on the US embassy in Baghdad, adding that the strike was aimed at deterring future Iranian attack plans. Iran called the US action extremely dangerous and a foolish escalation. It is noteworthy that General Soleimani was a major figure in the Iranian regime. His Quds force reported directly to the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and he was hailed as a heroic national figure. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. The days of handshakes and smiles may be over for now for US-North Korea ties. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has threatened that he will continue developing his country's nuclear deterrent and introduce a new strategic weapon in the near future. However, US says it is optimistic that Kim would not carry out his threat. Kim's remarks came after the United States missed a year-end deadline for the restart of denuclearization talks. The new year 2020 began with ominous signs of nuclear tensions in the Korean peninsula. Leader Kim Jong-un has signaled that North Korea will lift its moratoriums on nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missile tests. This, he said, at a 4-day meeting of the party officials in Pyongyang. And at the end of the meeting on 1st of January 2020, North Korean media quoted Kim as saying that the test ban, which he agreed to in talks with the US president, was no longer needed. Kim also reportedly said that his country planned to introduce a new strategic weapon in the near future. But he left a door open for dialogue and said that the scope of any testing would depend on the US's attitude. US President Donald Trump responded by saying that he had a good relationship with Kim and believed the North Korean leader would keep his word to refrain from nuclear and long-range missile tests. US Foreign Secretary Mike Pompeo also said that he hoped the North would choose peace over war.
We have to do what we have to do, but he did sign a contract, he did sign an agreement talking about denuclearization, and that was signed. Number one sentence, denuclearization. That was done in Singapore, and I think he's a man of his word, so we're going to find out, but I think he's a man of his word.
It is noteworthy that North Korea has previously fired missiles capable of reaching the entire US mainland and has carried out 6 nuclear tests that raised tensions within the Korean peninsula and led to tit-for-tat rhetoric and war of words between US and Pyongyang. However, tempers were eased with the historic meeting between Trump and Kim in June 2018, followed by nuclear diplomacy between the two sides over the past 2 years. But there has been little tangible progress. The North conducted several smaller weapons tests last year in what could be seen as an attempt to pressure the US into making concessions. However, the self-declared moratorium on nuclear tests and the tests of intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach the US mainland had been one of the foundations of the negotiations with Washington.
North Korea stated that the world will soon witness a new strategic weapon. The South Korean government makes it clear that if the North carries that out, it would not help denuclearization negotiations and efforts to build peace on the Korean peninsula.
Kim Jong-un in the party meeting also admitted that sanctions have hit the economy and were unlikely to be lifted soon, warning that the North Koreans will have to tighten out belts. The latest remark by Kim Jong-un sends a clear message to Washington: provide us with major concessions soon if you want to avoid long-range missile tests. The statement coming as the US heads to election in 2020. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And Hong Kong began the year 2020 just like 2019 ended, with protest chaos. The first day of the year saw a massive anti-government march that ended in chaos, protesters clashing with the police. At least 400 people were arrested. Violence escalated as night fell, with at least 5 HSBC outlets smashed up and a Starbucks outlet also vandalized. As a result, HSBC Bank closed all its Hong Kong branches. Hong Kong began 2020 with more protests. Crowds marched through downtown districts on New Year's Day to call for greater political freedom. The city's Victoria Park, the traditional staging ground for large protests, began to fill up from the early afternoon. Marchers chanted, "Liberate Hong Kong," and carried flags reading, "Revolution Now." Others held banners calling for independence.
2020, and I think we have rest enough. We have been feeling frustrated enough, and it is a time for us to gather today here again and then to tell the world that we haven't given up yet.
Although the march began peacefully, protesters and police soon began exchanging petrol bombs and tear gas. Premises of some businesses with mainland Chinese connections were vandalized. Tensions rose as dusk fell when protesters were ordered to disperse. Many instead pressed on to the march's destination in the financial district, while others set up barricades across major thoroughfares and engaged in standoffs with the police. The Hong Kong police arrested 400 protesters on the day.
Since they ignore our warning, some of our officers were worried about their own personal safety, and actually 2 handheld tear gas grenades was used to disperse the rioters right in front of them.
During the protest, branches of HSBC Bank were also vandalized. Protesters allege the bank is helping authorities against activists trying to raise money to support their campaign. The bank denies any involvement. The bank's branches have suspended their services in Hong Kong after the damage.
I believe that HSBC actually did give out a quite acceptable explanation to it, but actually it's quite a sensitive time and sensitive issue to deal with such incidents.
Earlier New Year's Eve also saw hundreds of protesters form human chains and others barricaded roads, sparking clashes with the police. The traditional New Year's Eve fireworks at Victoria Harbour, which normally draws large crowds, were cancelled after police voiced fears for public safety. In her New Year message, Hong Kong's top official Chief Executive Carrie Lam pledged to listen humbly to find a way out, but to no avail. Meanwhile, a group of 38 political figures from several countries wrote to Lam, urging her to set up a probe into the Hong Kong police force's handling of the unrest, which opponents say has been heavy-handed. The Hong Kong protests, now in their 7th month, originated in the opposition to plans to allow for fugitives to be extradited to mainland China. However, the protests have since escalated into an increasingly violent struggle against the local administration, with protesters demanding a fully elected legislature and popularly elected leader for the city. Nearly 6,500 people have been arrested since the start of the unrest. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And it's time for a short break here. And after the break, we'll tell you about the bushfires in Australia that have claimed 21 lives and how authorities are bracing for a weekend of high temperatures and strong winds that are threatening to worsen conditions. Details coming up ahead. Stay tuned. Australia is currently facing an unprecedented national crisis as the bushfires tear through communities across the nation. Since September, at least 21 people have been killed and thousands of homes have been destroyed. The scale of the threat is immense and fires continue to burn, with authorities calling for people to evacuate their homes as the country braces for another weekend of catastrophic danger. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has come under attack for his response to the fires. Morrison has also faced criticism for his climate change policies, with many saying that urgent action must be taken. Military ships and aircraft being deployed in Australia to help communities ravaged by wildfires. Navy ships and military aircraft are bringing water, food and fuel to towns where supplies are depleted and roads cut off by the fires.
Priority today is fighting fires and evacuating and getting people to safety. What is incredibly important is that we continue to maintain the focus on these very important tasks. Those tasks are being well led and run by our state authorities, both in Victoria and in New South Wales, and I am in constant contact with premiers of both of those states.
New South Wales has been the worst affected state. The Premier of the Australian state declared a week-long state of emergency on Friday in response to the escalating bushfire threat. 916 homes have been destroyed this season, with another 363 damaged. More than 100 fires are still burning in the state. 7 people died this week, including a firefighter. Firefighting crews took advantage of easing conditions on Wednesday to restore power to critical infrastructure and conduct some backburning, as conditions were expected to deteriorate on Saturday as high temperatures and strong winds return. While many people were evacuated on Wednesday, many still remain in fire-hit areas. As a result, there are warnings that total of fire-related fatalities across Australia could rise.
Oh, it's just a scary feeling, I think. Just everything that's going on. There was no fuel, we've got no power, no phone service out where we are. So
we were here on New Year's Eve. That was really, really bad. We were in the van, the wind direction changed. The next minute, it was completely dark.
Another state that has been badly affected is Victoria. Thousands of people in the coastal town of Malakuta fled to the shore as winds pushed fires towards their home. Stranded residents sleeping in their cars and gas stations. Police boats reached shores with drinking water, paramedics and medical supplies for the residents. The sky here darkened by smoke and turned blood red by flames. Conditions cooled somewhat on Wednesday, but the fire danger remained very high across the state, where 4 people are missing. Australian Defence Force is moving naval assets to Malakuta on a supply mission that would last 2 weeks, and helicopters would also fly in more firefighters since roads were inaccessible.
Some people may not want to leave. They may want to stay in there with their four-wheel drives and their caravans until such time as they may be able to get out by road. That could be a number of weeks. That could be 2 to 3 weeks at this stage. So what we'll do is we'll offer the opportunity to get as many people out as we possibly can.
About 12.35 million acres of land have burned across Australia over the past few months, with at least 18 people dead and more than 1,000 homes destroyed. The early and devastating start to the Australia summer fires has led authorities to rate this season the worst on record. It has also reignited debate about whether Prime Minister Scott Morrison's Conservative government has taken enough action on climate change. It is noteworthy that Morrison won a surprise third term in May. Among his government's pledges was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 26% to 28% by 2030, a modest figure compared to the opposition Labour Party's pledge of 45%. Meanwhile, smoke from the wildfires meant Canberra, the nation's capital, air quality has deteriorated. On Wednesday, the AQI was more than 21 times the hazardous rating, to be reportedly the worst in the world. The smoke has also wafted across the Tasman Sea and into New Zealand. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. A fire raced through a zoo in western Germany in the first few minutes of the new year, killing more than 30 animals. Police said that paper sky lanterns launched nearby to celebrate the arrival of 2020 were probably to blame. The zoo said that its entire ape house burnt down and more than 30 animals, including 5 orangutans, 2 gorillas, a chimpanzee and several monkeys were killed, as well as the fruit bats and birds. Only 2 chimpanzees were able to be rescued from the flames by the firefighters. They suffered burns but are in a stable condition. Many of the dead animals were close to extinction in the wild. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has decided to seek parliamentary immunity from prosecution over corruption charges. The move would likely delay a trial until after fresh elections next March. In November last year, the Prime Minister was charged by the Attorney General with bribery, fraud and breach of trust in 3 separate cases. Netanyahu, who denies wrongdoing, would need the support of more than half of MPs for immunity to be granted. In March, he faces a 3rd national election within a year. A sitting Prime Minister in Israel is only required to step down once convicted. And Japanese prosecutors raided the Tokyo home of former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn after he skipped bail before a trial on financial misconduct charges and left for Lebanon. It is unclear how Ghosn avoided the tight surveillance he was under in Japan and showed up in Lebanon. Ghosn said in a statement that he left for Lebanon because he thought that the Japanese judicial system was unjust and he wanted to avoid political persecution. Japan does not have an extradition treaty with Lebanon. The death toll from flash floods and landslides in and around Indonesia's capital Jakarta reached at least 43, with more heavy rain forecast. The deadliest of floods in years has displaced more than 192,000 people and caused chaos across parts of the densely populated city, with the train lines blocked and power outages in some areas. Indonesian authorities are now turning to the technique of cloud seeding to try to stop more rain falling in Jakarta. Airplanes have been sent to inject chemicals into the clouds in an effort to alter precipitation. Sheila Fibrianti and Brian Egger's house was covered in mud when they returned from a temporary shelter on Thursday, one day after a flash flood hit the couple's home in East Jakarta. As floods started to subside in parts of the Indonesian capital, cleaning was underway.
We hope this will never happen again. Floods happen every 5 years. If possible, do not let this happen again. What we ask is widen the waterway, clean the drainage so water flow from the other cities will not affect us.
Authorities also reopened the Halim Perdana Kusuma Airport in Jakarta for limited operations on Thursday. Heavy monsoon rains had lashed the Indonesian capital and nearby cities since New Year's Eve. The rain submerged homes and cars and cut access as many roads in Jakarta were not passable. More than 700 areas in Greater Jakarta region suffered from power outages on 1st of January. Commuter trains also suspended some operations. The government on Wednesday instructed schools and some offices to be prepared to provide shelter. Indonesian government, citing the Geophysics Agency, says that extreme weather may continue across Indonesia until 7th of January and warned people to remain on alert for further flooding or landslides.
I only have one hope, which is asking the current governor to fix this because it affects all people. Everyone needs to run their errands. Take the right action, please. Look at what is happening now. Bring the situation back to normal.
President Joko Widodo ordered government agencies to prioritize security and rescue measures. Infrastructure matters will be discussed after the evacuation process is completed.
Regarding the flooding issue, the central government is still quite new and a lot of projects still yet to complete, including Simahi Reservoir, that will only complete next year. But other projects must complete.
It is noteworthy that Jakarta and its surroundings are home to more than 30 million people. More than 50 people died in one of the capital's deadliest floods in 2007, and 5 years ago, much of the center of the city was inundated after canals overflowed. The government announced last year that it is relocating the capital to East Kalimantan province on Borneo, though the planning ministry pledged that the government will invest $40 billion in modernizing Jakarta as well. Clearly, much needs to be done. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And that is all in this edition of our World Panorama. But before we go, take a look at this barber from Tamil Nadu who has come out with a new discount offer for his customers, and the only condition is to read books while sitting there. A book lover himself, Pon Mariyappan, started this unique initiative where he gives a 40% discount to customers who read books from his free library, which he has made inside his salon. He wants book reading to become more common than people looking into their mobile phones or other electronic devices. So take a look at the visuals of this amazing barber and his unique salon. As I take your leave, I'll see you next week in this program. Bye for now.